Okay, so when we have a number in front of the x squared like we do here, this is 2x squared. First thing we should do is see if there is the greatest common factor that we can take out. And in this case, there is a 2 that we can take out from each of these terms. So we will divide each of these by 2. 2x squared divided by 2 would give me x squared. 10x divided by 2 would give me 5x. And 8 divided by 2 would give me 4. So this is what I get when I take out the greatest common factor. Now that I have taken out the greatest common factor, now I have just x squared as the first term in the parentheses. So I can factor this by using just the x method. I don't need the box to go with it. The last number, 4, goes on top, and the middle number, 5, goes on bottom. So that means I'm looking for numbers that multiply to 4 and add to 5. Those would be 1 and 4, because 1 times 4 is 4, and 1 plus 4 is 5. So that'll give me factors 2, which I started with the greatest common factor, and then x plus 1, and x plus 4. Equals 0. From there, I'm going to set each factor equal to 0. With this first one, the 2, I don't actually need to set that one equal to 0 because I don't have an x as part of that factor. So there's nothing, no value for x will solve that one. But I'm going to set, let me go back to where I was. I'm going to set x plus 1 equal to 0 and x plus 4 equal to 0 and solve for x. For x plus 1, I can get rid of the plus 1 by doing minus 1, and that'll give me x equals negative 1. On the other side, very similarly, I can get rid of the plus 4 by doing minus 4, and this will give me x equals negative 4. And so my two numbers for x are going to be negative 1 and negative 4. Okay, on to number 2, same thing. We have a number in front of the x squared, so I need to see if there's anything in common that I can take out. 4, 24, and 28 do all have 4 in common, so I can take out a 4 as the greatest common factor. 4x squared divided by 4 will give me just x squared. Negative 24x divided by 4 would give me negative 6x. And negative 28 divided by 4 would give me negative 7. This is what I'm going to get after I take out the greatest common factor of 4. Again, just like the last one, once I've taken out that greatest common factor, I'm going to have just x squared here, so I don't need to do the box. I can just do the x method, where in this case negative 7 will go on top of the box, or on top of the x, and negative 6 will go on the bottom. So then I'm looking for numbers that multiply to negative 7 and add to negative 6, and those would be negative 7 and 1, which will give me factors 4, x minus 7, and x plus 1 equals 0. And again, I can set these factors equal to 0 to find what x equals. So x minus 7 equals 0, and x plus 1 equals 0. For x minus 7, I can get rid of the minus 7 by doing plus 7 on both sides, and that'll give me x equals 7. For x plus 1, I can do minus 1 on both sides, and that'll give me x equals negative 1. And so the two numbers for x are going to be 7 and negative 1. Okay, on to number 3. We should again look to see if there's anything in common to take out. I'm looking at 3, 13, and negative 10. But these don't have anything in common besides 1 that we could take out. So we can't take out a greatest common factor from this one. We are going to need to do the x and also the box for this problem. So to start with, for the x, we're going to take this number in front of the x squared and multiply it times this last term. So 3 times negative 10 would go on top, which that is negative 30. 3 times negative 10. And 13, the middle number still goes in the bottom. So now I'm looking for numbers that multiply to negative 30 and add to 13. those are going to be 15 and negative 2. 15 times negative 2 is negative 30, and 15 plus negative 2 is 13. So now that I've filled out the x, I need to do the box as well. 3x squared will go in the first box. 3x squared. Negative 10, the last term, will go in the last box. And then we take this 13x and we turn it into 15x and minus 2x. And that's what goes into the other two boxes. 15x and negative 2x. From there, we're going to look to see what do 3x squared and 2x have in common. That is going to go on top, and what they have in common is x. Then I want to see what do 15x and negative 10 have in common, and that will also go on top of those. So 15x and negative 10 have 5 in common, and that will give me my first factor, which is x plus 5. Okay, then I want to see for the rows, what do 3x, oops, I want a highlighter. What do 3x squared and 15x have in common? And those have 3x in common. And finally, I want to see what do negative 2x and negative 10 have in common. And those have a negative 2 in common. It's negative because the one that it's next to is negative. So this negative 2x makes it a negative 2 here. So 3x minus 2 is my other factor. Okay. So once I have these two factors, we will set them equal to 0 again, just like we did on the other one. So if we have x plus 5 equals 0, we'll solve that one by doing minus 5 on each side, and we'll get x equals negative 5. For 3x minus 2 equals 0, we'll start by adding 2 to both sides, and we'll get 3x equals 2. Then we need to divide by 3 on both sides, and we're going to get x equals 2/3. So the two numbers that we have for x are going to be negative 5 and 2/3, or 2 over 3. Okay, on to number 5. We again should check to see if we have anything in common with 5, 8, and 3. There is nothing in common so to take out besides 1. So we will need to do the x and the box. What goes on top of the x would be 5 times 3, which is 15. And then negative 8 goes on the bottom. So we're looking for numbers that multiply to 15 and add to negative 8. And those would be negative 5 and negative 3. Then to fill in the box, 5x squared goes in the first box. The 3 goes in the last box. And then the negative 8x we turn into negative 5x and negative 3x. And those goes in the other two boxes. Okay. Then once again, we're going to see what our columns and our rows have in common. So our 5x and negative 3x, those have x in common. And then our negative 5x and 3, those have just a negative 1 in common. Again, because it's next to this negative 5, that makes it a negative here. Then for our rows, if we look at 5x squared and negative 5x, those would have 5x in common. And finally, for negative 3x and 3, those would have a negative 3 in common. Once again, because this one is negative, it makes this one negative as well. So my two factors are going to be x minus 1 and 5x minus 3 equals 0. Set each factor equal to 0. X minus 1 equals 0. We're going to add 1 to each side, and we'll get x equals 1. For 5x minus 3 equals 0. Oops. 5x minus 3 equals 0. We'll start by adding 3 to each side, and we will get 5x equals 3. Then we need to divide each side by 5, and we will get x equals 3/5. So the two numbers we have for x are going to be 1 and 3. Let me do better, 3/5. That still looks much better. There we go. Okay, so that is it for this first page.